A typical plantation scene in the early 1800s. For my research paper, Tabitha Tenney's Female Quixotism was my research project. One of the things that I didn't get to discuss in my paper is the aspect of plantations and slavery that the title character, Dorcasina Sheldon, lived in and about. Her friends, her servants, the combination of the two within the plantation really kind of made me wonder what the setting would have been like. Figure a timeline of when Tabitha Tenney's first version was printed would have been 1801. So right at that transitional period, the Civil War was years away, but lines at this point were even starting to be drawn. The characters that Dorcasina Sheldon interacts with exclusively in Female Quixotism would be her loyal servant Betty, Scipio, the gardener, and his mistress, Miss Violet. These would be the main servant characters in the book. Doesn't really say whether or not they were free or slaves. It's just known that Dorcasina is the daughter of a wealthy plantation owner. About 30 miles away from Philadelphia, she's the typical rich girl, grew up there on the plantation, has a really good heart when it comes to being an abolitionist. Dorcasina is actually quoted as saying slavery and happiness she believes were incompatible. One of the things about the setting that was kind of interesting, especially in the North and South division of things, was the idea of in the South, slaves had their own housing, small huts outside away from the main buildings, while up north it was usually more in the terms of servants. There still was slave trading going on, but you figure that they were living in manors underneath one roof that allowed for the relationship to be a little more personal. In fact, you could say that they didn't have to work as hard because of the different type of servitude that they were indentured to. In 1780, Pennsylvania, the state where the story of Dorcasina Sheldon takes place, passed a law to free all slaves. Basically, this didn't free them immediately. There were actually still slaves up until Civil War days. There was a census taken in 1810 that showed that there were nearly 800 slaves still in the state of Pennsylvania. But what it did do is give free slaves rights that they hadn't had before. With social times, it was something that allowed for them to vote. They were able to have property, and there were notations of people that actually, of former slaves that actually had property holdings worth value. There was an 1821 Abolition Society report which stated that they excluded the free slaves from the most profitable and respectable employments. They were left to the confined, the least, most humble, gainful occupations possible. As you can see, there was still an incredible disparity between society when it came to color. There was always the difference in class and gender bias, but a major issue would have been the pre- and post-slavery era that really was affected in the late 1800s, early 1900s time frame. With the northern plantations, it wasn't really thought that there were slaveholders up there because those were the free states, you know, the abolitionist states. In reality, there still was quite a bit of slave trading going on, and it had been going on for quite a while. It was actually noted that George Washington himself was a slave owner. This is a little off the Pennsylvania aspect, but just showing the roots go really deep. In the book that Tabitha Tenney wrote, this Female Quixotism, Dorcasina, she's quoted as saying, slavery and happiness are, in my opinion, totally incompatible. But she was quite transported with the idea that she should be the benefactress of slaves, that she could extend her benevolent reveries on the plantations of her future husband, that she might be able to free them. She dreams of being able to free slaves and being able to herself no longer be a slave mistress. She is the only heir to her father's fortune, which most of the suitors in her story are after. Thus the reasoning for Dorcasina being protected by those around her. But because of her delusion and imagination, these people are constantly subjected by her actions. They're just kind of forced to deal with it because of where they're at and their station in life. So I thought, just as kind of a background, that would be kind of a really interesting thing to think about. Think about the idea of, the setting of the actual novel, was still at a time a lot of social unrest, a lot of things being discovered and figured out at the time. And this was just an aspect that there was no way I could delve into in my paper, especially considering the length. Like, this is something that books are written about. But just as a side note, thought it would be a worthy presentation. Hope you enjoyed.